It's really great to be here. And I just like to say that I was here last year, and I didn't realize that this year, I'd be standing in front of you as a speaker. I had mentioned to Catherine at last year's conference that there was no legal content, and I didn't realize she took it seriously. And so when she sent me an email asking if I was interested in coming to talk, I jumped at it. Just to say that it was a non-starter. I had to accept, but it was at a really difficult time because we just moved house, and I was just able to pack up the old house, kind of set up the new house, and jump on the flight to come to Utah. And so here I am. Now, as is indicated, the topic of my discussion is the legal implications of international medical collaborations, and I'm using Nigeria as an example. My background is, I specialize in health law, and in Nigeria we don't have specialties in law. But more and more people are tending towards specializing. And I chose health law because my husband is a doctor, one, and when he was doing his specialist training in Virginia, I worked with Sentara Medical Health Systems, and that's how I got introduced to health law. And it's just been a topic that has grown in Nigeria, and I think is growing in the rest of Africa. Now, I chose this topic because Africa's economy is growing, and rapidly so, and Nigeria occupies a very key place in this exponential growth. Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa, with a population of about 160 million people, and it's about the 7th most populous country in the world. And if available statistics are anything to go by on the growing rate of foreign investments in Nigeria and the future of the Nigerian economy, it's not out of place to conclude that Nigeria is a strategic market for all manner of foreign investments and collaborations. And I'd just like to give you a brief overview and background of the Nigerian legal system. I'll try not to make this too dry, legal conversation. Nigeria is a federation, and it's with a center, a strong center, and it's a federation of 36 states, including the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja, which is the capital of Nigeria. Nigeria operates, the legal system of Nigeria is based on the common law model. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. And it's inherited. It's inherited from the British system. As you all know, Nigeria was colonized by Britain. But this model is what we operate, but it's now with modifications and refinements to suit our local conditions. Now, as in most countries, registration with a medical regulatory body is a formal requirement to practice in Nigeria. I'm not going to, I'm sure you're familiar with registration processes and so on here. We have the same in Nigeria. But the primary medical regulatory body is the Medical and Dental Council of Nigeria, MDCN. And there are several, apart from the MDCN, there are several other bodies that share responsibility for the regulation of the medical profession in Nigeria, including federal and state agencies. Now, my talk is going to center around two stories, but hopefully I'll answer the question, why collaborate? And I'm going to use what I have termed as the Del South and UT Southwestern story, and at the end, the objectives and benefits of collaboration. Now, just briefly before I go into the story, The structure and nature of medical regulation in Nigeria, as I said, the MDCN is the primary regulator. And then we have the Nigerian Medical Association, which is a semi-voluntary association of medical and dental practitioners. And then we have federal government, the federal government through the Federal Ministry of Health. And then we have state governments, as I said, 36 states, through state ministries of health and the National Postgraduate Medical College of Nigeria. Now to the story. Now, at the time we attended last year's conference, my husband Leslie had just been appointed the CMD, Chief Medical Director, Chief Executive Officer of the Delta State University Teaching Hospital, that's what DELSUTH stands for, in a village in Nigeria called Ogara in Delta State. Delta State is where we come from, and it's one of the states that makes up the so-called Niger Delta states of Nigeria. I'm sure you've heard about the Niger Delta states. It has all sorts of negative connotations, but there are good things about it too. And one of the mandates that Leslie has, and still has, is to turn DELSUTH into a world-class facility. And I can tell you that that's a very, very tall order because there are so many drawbacks. Infrastructural deficiencies, poor training of manpower, poor funding stemming from, among other things, non-integration of efforts in planning and in decision-making, all of which impact outcomes in healthcare delivery. And so Leslie identified a critical area to make an impact in a short time, and this was the establishment of a kidney diseases program in Ogara. The prevalence of end-stage kidney disease in that part of the country informed this choice. And so the next step was to identify an institution that could partner with DELSUTH to establish such a program in the next 5 years. And so Fiemu Wariaku, the Associate Dean for Global Health at UT Southwestern in Dallas, worked with Leslie to make possible a collaboration between UT Southwestern and DELSUTH to establish the Kidney Diseases Program at Ogara, with the aim of performing the first kidney transplant by the end of this year. There is obviously a very wide gap, infrastructural, manpower, to name but a few, between where DELSUTH is now, the institution, and where it ought to be to achieve the stated aim. And one thing that was obvious was that trying to establish this program of renal replacement treatment would require an upgrade of the facilities, various aspects of institution, and also an upgrade of clinical services. I have talked about poor funding, I have talked about poor training of manpower. All of these had to be addressed. And so the state government was brought in, the Delta State government was brought in, because this collaboration was between the Delta State government and the institution, Ogara, the Delta State University Teaching Hospital, and the UT Southwestern in Dallas. The Delta State governor, himself a medical doctor, officials of the state ministries of health, as well as health personnel from the Delta State University Teaching Hospital, went to Dallas in November last year and signed an MOU with UT Southwestern to set up this kidney diseases program in 5 years. Now, this picture shows the group that went, and these are officials of the Delta State Ministry of Health, people from UT Southwestern, and also officials from the Delta State University Teaching Hospital. Now, what is important about this, and the legal requirements is what I'm going to highlight in a few moments, is that this group comprised people who could make decisions to make happen this collaboration. This collaboration, the legal implications of this collaboration would require waivers of licenses to practice in Nigeria. This group were people that could make happen this collaboration in a very short time. It was important that the Delta State governor was present because this gave it a stamp of approval in that he could identify what critical areas of upgrade that needed to be made at the Delta State University Teaching Hospital, and then make budgetary decisions right there and then. Now, also, the officials of the State Ministry of Health who could grant waivers and so on were also present. That's Leslie, that's the governor, and that's one of the officials of the ministry also at the signing, MOU signing ceremony. Now, the granting of waivers was important because one of the things that was addressed in the MOU was that doctors from UT Southwestern would come over to Ogara to train doctors, and nurses also would come over to train, and there would be reciprocity because nurses from Ogara would also go to UT Southwestern to train. One of the requirements is of practicing in medical practice in Nigeria is that doctors had to be registered by the MDCN, and foreign trained doctors had to have provisional licenses to practice in Nigeria. And in order to do this, you had to be a specialist. You have to be a specialist and register under the specialist program. And this typically would take a very long time. And don't forget that they had a mandate to set up this program in the next 5 years. And so they had to bridge this gap. And so the officials of the State Ministry of Health have granted waivers to doctors who have come. The MOU was signed in November last year, and doctors have come, I think, in February and in March to start the training program. As I speak, nurses from Ogara are due to go in April to UT Southwestern to train and start the training program in UT Southwestern in Dallas. Now, the other collaboration I want to talk about is I'll go back, is the public-private partnership. The difference between this and the first one that I talked about is that in this public-private partnership, and I'll use the Delta State University Teaching Hospital again as an example to demonstrate this, is a collaboration between institutions. There is no government content in this. It's a collaboration between institutions and privately owned company. Another area that was identified was that the laboratory in Delta State University had to be upgraded. And so the institution signed a contract with a South African company to upgrade the lab in the next 5 years. This particular collaboration involved the formation of a company by the South African company in Nigeria. And it's akin to what you will refer to here as a for-profit model. The South African company is expected to charge for its services and split profits with the Delta State University. And the expectation is that in the next 5 years, it would have recouped its investment. As I said, the emphasis in this particular collaboration is on upgrading the lab in Delsuth and training manpower, that is lab scientists, in the Delta State University. The legal implications here are that the company has to be incorporated in Nigeria. The South African company has to be incorporated in Nigeria because the law requires that a foreign company intending to carry on business in Nigeria must be incorporated with the Corporate Affairs Commission unless the proposed company qualifies for exemption under the statute. The statutory exemptions are predominantly confined to companies formed to carry on specific government-approved projects and entities controlled by foreign states. But a foreign entity can invest in a Nigerian company without getting incorporated if it does not intend to actually carry on business in Nigeria itself. It can carry on business through a Nigerian company. As I said, the difference between this collaboration and the one that I first discussed is that this has no government content, but it is between the institution and the foreign company. Now, I'm not going to go through read through the slides, but just to give you a flavor of what a company that is intending to invest, or an entity, I would say, that is intending to collaborate with in Nigeria, what they need to go through. The second example that I gave, the for-profit example, requires the company to be registered with the Corporate Affairs Commission. Registration could be private or public or limited by shares. It could be a business name, or it could be an incorporated trustees. The last one is what I will just dwell a little bit on. The incorporated trustees, NGOs, are typically the vehicle for institutions such as IVU Med to collaborate with institutions in Nigeria like DELSUTH, because these are non-profit organizations. And so the requirements for collaboration here and the requirements for legal requirements for collaboration here, when I say here, I'm talking about the states, and collaboration in Nigeria would be better served if they went through the incorporated trustees, that is the NGOs. Now, the next few slides address the requirements for registration in Nigeria. Now, provisional registration, types granted to interns, and I included these slides because I know that volunteers have come to Nigeria to offer services. Volunteers that are medical students, interns, and so on. And I just wanted to highlight the legal requirements that would have to be complied with before these types of medical personnel practice in Nigeria. And if you remember, I talked about, in the first example I gave, about ministry officials. Usually, if there is a dedicated stated purpose, you can actually apply for waivers for these, and the waivers will be covered by, in this example, the State Ministry of Health officials can grant waivers to personnel or doctors that usually should be required to be registered in these categories. So there's the full registration, which is the type of registration that is required after the internship is complete and grants the practitioner independence to practice. Now, the next two types of registration actually speak to the requirements needed for specialists and doctors such as the type that I've been talking about, who want to establish global practices in Nigeria. For example, a specialist urologist like IVU Med, they would have to apply to the MDCN for as a specialist to be able to practice in Nigeria. Now, these these other slides just go through what the requirements are for registration. This will not be strange to you because there are also requirements that you would have here in the States. Now, I decided to bring to give you this story about the Jessup example, because quite often what perception people have of collaborations in low-resource places like Nigeria is that people can just come in and just set up practices or just collaborate or decide to collaborate with institutions or people in Nigeria. For example, we have several examples of people who come and want to provide medical missions to Nigeria. And the perception is that they come in and set up shop in rural parts of Nigeria and just carry on practice. But there are requirements, and it is these legal requirements that I have tried to highlight today. And it is not to say that Nigeria is it's a free economy, and the government is actually striving to grow the economy by opening it up. And so a foreign entity can own a business 100% in Nigeria, invest and own a business 100% in Nigeria, and repatriate funds. And so what I want to leave with you today is that the wide gap that exists in areas that facilitate the attainment of these acceptable standards in healthcare delivery in developing countries like Nigeria, it would take forever for us to close these gaps and achieve international best practices if we had to reinvent the wheel. And so the answer to the question, why collaborate, is that we collaborate so that we can close this gap. Because collaborations such as the example I gave you with UT Southwestern and Jessup are opportunities to bridge the gap. Such collaborations require an upgrade of services. They require an upgrade of infrastructure in the institutions in a very focused and within a very taut time frame. And this is what we need in developing countries like Nigeria to actually get to a place where we can provide healthcare using international best practices in the shortest possible time. Thank you very much.